Okay, we're live.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Bryan Waite, and I am the moderator for this particular session. Thank you all for joining us. Oh, we're live now. There seems to be a lag.
Yeah, there's a lag between the YouTube feed and the Zoom call.
Sorry. Okay, so let me start again. My name is Dr. Bryan Waite, and I am moderating this this session. Thank you all for joining us. We're excited to have you. We all represent the School of Education at UVU, and all of us are particularly interested in global and intercultural topics and programs and activities for both faculty, staff, as well as students. And so those are the things that we're going to be talking about today. The title of this session is Embedding Critical Multicultural Education Throughout Teacher Preparation, as you've seen. And I did I don't want to read the description, but I do kind of want to touch on some of the things before I introduce our panelists. We've been involved in trying to diversify and globalize the School of Education for quite some time. And we have a number of things that we focus on. Some of those have to do with what we do pedagogically in the classroom, and some of them have to do with how we kind of do outreach into the community and globally. And so what we'll talk about today is how we look at and think about culturally relevant pedagogy and how that practice goes into the classroom. We also want to talk about critical multicultural education and how that impacts teacher preparation. We will look at also some programs that we've created in the School of Education where we allow our students and provide opportunities for our students to go to different places, both domestically as well as internationally, in order to look at diversity in different lenses, increase their own awareness, and do some reciprocity work with what they know and the assets that others have. So we'll hopefully have some time at the end to have some questions that you can post in the chat. But let me introduce our panelists real quick. And we have Dr. Benton Brown, who is the Assistant Dean in the School of Education at UVU. He currently leads the engagement activities for all local and global programs and activities within the school. Benton is a former secondary math teacher and has a wealth of experience in education globally. He's lived abroad. He works with universities in Ghana. He was a head of teacher education for Bath Spa University in the United Kingdom before he joined us here at UVU. So welcome, Dr. Brown. We also, give us a wave so we know which one is you. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Awesome. Perfect. We have Dr. Kang, who is been with UVU for quite some time. She's an associate professor in the Department of Elementary Education. She's been here since 2011, and she teaches courses of ESL teaching methods, so teaching English as a second language methods. These are for students who are going out to become teachers and helping them understand how they can better prepare future teachers for teaching kids who don't speak English as their first language, for example. She also teaches multicultural education. She has been in public education for 30 years, mostly in secondary education in South Korea, and in elementary and higher education in the US for 15 years. And she has a lot of research interests, but a lot have to do with critical multicultural and multilingual curriculum and pedagogy for social justice and equity, critical pedagogy and educational policy studies. So Mia, can you give us a wave? All right,
Hi,
thank you.
Mia.
And then finally, we have Dr. Mike Patch, who's an associate professor in UVU School of Education and the previous department chair of elementary education. He is a former high school teacher and administrator and taught school internationally before coming to UVU. He teaches multicultural education and ESL strategies courses. And he's also done a lot in helping us create the international opportunities for our students. He leads the group Tatanga, which he'll speak a little bit about later. So Dr. Patch, thank you for joining us. Okay, so we have a set of questions that we would like to kind of go through, and I'm going to let the panelists kind of fight over who wants to speak first on some of these. Occasionally I'll call on one of them to kind of address it. But the first one is I want to define some of the terms that we'll be talking about today. So the terms that I've thrown out so far are critically, actually, let me introduce myself real quick before I get too far. I'm a department chair for secondary education. I've been with UVU for about 12 years now. And I teach multicultural education as well. I also teach language acquisition classes. And I also direct a program on campus known as the GI. It's the Global Intercultural Program. And that's a program where we help faculty who teach our G courses. And then I also work with students who are working on a distinction of global intercultural competence. So that's my background. Okay, so I've thrown out some terms here: culturally relevant pedagogy, critical multicultural education, ESL methods, and then global and domestic intercultural experiences. And what I'd like for you all to do on the panel is just take turns and please describe, and you don't have to do all of those terms, but maybe pick 2 or 3, and would you define those for our audience, how you see them? Can we start with you, Dr. Brown?
Sure. These are all terms that I think have varying definitions, and you'll probably hear a lot of variety in them throughout, maybe even in the 3 of us, but also throughout the literature. But I think one of the things that's most important for me when it comes to culturally relevant pedagogy is understanding that your own view of the world and your own view of society might not be the same as your students. I've heard it said by one teacher that culturally relevant pedagogy is academically rigorous, holding high standards for all students, regardless of their background, but also helping for students to feel affirmed in their own identities and experiences that they have. But then I think also beyond that, and this kind of gets into the critical multicultural education as well, is helping students to develop a knowledge of other cultures and the skill to be able to engage in the world, in a world where there are many different cultures, and do so in a critical but respectful way, not to criticize, but rather to just analyze differences and value those differences. And I think that's one of the things with critical multicultural education is really for students to be able to acknowledge differences in culture, traditions, ways of living, but then to celebrate those differences instead of allowing those to separate us. And I think, to me, that's one of the biggest things about both culturally relevant pedagogy and the way that we teach and the way that teachers teach, but also in critical multicultural education. When it comes to global domestic intercultural experiences, I think that one of the biggest things for me there is getting people out of their comfort zones. I think that students and teachers should have experiences that expose them to different cultures, help them to broaden their minds as a teacher, but also as an individual, and celebrate what makes the world unique, and that is our differences. And I think our cultural experiences, which I know we'll talk about later in some of the other questions, but I think our intercultural experiences that we offer in the School of Education and that UVU offers more broadly allows individuals to experience different cultures, to challenge their own norms, and to recognize that what we think of as normal is based on our own experiences, that there are different ways, different cultures out there and different ways of doing things, especially in education. And so exposing individuals to different methods, different ways, I think are really great. And so I think those are sort of some of my thoughts on the definitions of those terms.
Thank you very much. The other 2 of you, maybe even more on ESL methods and pedagogy, and what your views on those are.
The significance of this to me is within the educational arena gaining, because since we're teacher educators and preparing the future teaching force, it's significant that we and they know the dynamics of the profession. Currently, about 90% of our K-12 teachers are white, 75% female. And that cross-section, if you will, is pretty static currently. And at the same time, we have an escalation of students who aren't like the teaching force, who linguistically, culturally, racially are different. And in fact, within a couple of short years, we will have more students that are not white than we do that are white. And so it's significant that we prepare our teachers, as Benton said, not simply to recognize their own reality as the only validity, but to recognize that there are others out there, and that we as teachers are the ones responsible to create an environment where all students can cultivate tools for success in whatever arena they want to be successful in, and also by what their definition of success is.
Thank you. Mia, maybe I'll ask a little bit more direct to you, kind of a 1 and 2 question. So what does ESL methods mean to you? How would you define that? And then if you could speak a little to our second question of why do you think it's important that teacher candidates engage in ESL methods specifically?
Thank you for the questions. So my course in my ESL method class, I'm preparing teachers to teach English as a second language in US public schools. It covers both the theoretical and applied aspects of second language learning and teaching, and also provides general and special educators and second language specialists techniques, activities, and strategies and resources to plan instruction for English language learners. It's basically introducing teachers to the teaching of English as a second language, not only for linguistic development, but for cognitive, academic, and social development as well. So in terms of culturally relevant pedagogy, as Mike already mentioned, there is a huge gap between teachers and the students we are teaching. And when Gloria Lesson-Billings described, and when she coined the term culturally relevant pedagogy, she specifically mentioned that it's a pedagogy that empowers students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically by using cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And teachers who are implementing culturally relevant pedagogy create a bridge. I think the bridge is the key word here, creating a bridge between students' home and school lives while meeting the expectations of the school and state curricular requirements. They utilize the backgrounds, knowledge, and experiences of the students to inform the teacher's lessons and methodology. So when I teach this course to my future teachers, I always ask them to reflect who they are as a future teacher and who their students would be in the future. And they will find many similarities and differences, especially the gaps in their experiences. And teacher candidates here, usually when I ask them about their culture and language, they said sometimes, I don't have any culture, I just only speak English, but they don't know where there are so many rich culture here, even though they say that I don't have any culture. So I just ask them to think about it, and then just to think about the bridge. And also one thing I really focus on is the changing or just seeing very deeply about their perspectives first. Who they are. It's all about their perspectives about who they are as a future teacher, and also think about who their students would be and bridge the gap if they can think of any, and always get started from the strengths of their future ELLs, especially, instead of just thinking that, oh, they lack something, and or they don't have anything, they don't speak any English. Instead, I'm just keeping asking them to think about what they bring to the classroom, bring to the community, and how they enrich our community as a whole. So that's something I really always focus on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that detail, and from all of you, your explanations. Did any of you want to add anything to our second question of why these are important concepts to consider and create for students in teacher education programs before we go to the curriculum?
I'll jump in real quick, Brian. I think one thing that we need to remember about teachers and teacher education is the huge role that teachers play in shaping the lives of their students and influencing their thoughts about the world. The amount of, if you just think about the sheer amount of time that teachers spend with students, I mean, maybe next to parents, they're one of the biggest influence in a young person's lives. And so I think, you know, when we talk about why we would want to, you know, create create these types of you know, culturally relevant thoughts and pedagogy in the minds of teachers, is we think about how much they're going to influence the next generation. And I think that's really important, is that teachers can really influence the way that students see the world. And I think that, to me, makes this even more important.
And, you know, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I would just like to add as well that one of the things, I know I'm supposed to be moderator here, but I also have a stake in this very deeply. So the going along with what Benton is saying is that the assets, like teaching our students to understand the assets of their students, is so fundamental. And that is a very hard concept to get. We are so prone to think of difference from a deficit viewpoint. If someone does something different than us, we are so socialized to think, oh, well, why do they do it that way? Why do they not realize that there's a better way of doing it? And to help our students understand that because people are different, it is an asset to me as a teacher, is something very, very important that we're trying to instill in our classes in the school and in our experiences in the School of Education. Just a quick story. Sorry, everybody knew I was going to do this anyway. So talk more than I should, but a quick story. So I was teaching a lesson on self-cultural awareness at a local junior high a couple of years ago, helping these 8th graders kind of come to terms with who they were culturally and why it mattered. And we did this activity, and they kind of like they delved into who they were, the cultural characteristics they were maybe more born with, and then the cultural characteristics that they achieved and they added to themselves. And I was debriefing this activity with them, and I asked them, what did you learn about this? And I will never forget, one of the students, 8th grader, 13-year-old young man, raises his hand and says, I learned that I can be friends with people because I'm different from them. And what I thought was so significant about that comment was the wording he chose. He didn't say, I can be friends with people even though I'm different from them. I can be friends with people despite our differences. He said, I can be friends with people because I'm different from them. And I think that that is so fundamental. If our future teachers can go into the classroom and look for ways that they can help their students look at difference as an asset, then we will be doing what our goal in the School of Education. So let me kind of switch to our third question for the panelists. What has the School of Education done to provide students with GI curriculum during their teacher education preparation? Now, let me define GI. At UVU, we have an initiative called the GI, or Global Intercultural Initiative. Many of you students out there have taken a class that ends in a G. That class that ends in a G means that it is a GI class, right? It has been designated as a global intercultural class. Faculty go through trainings for what that means to them, and students can actually graduate from UVU with a GI distinction on their transcript showing that they have global and intercultural competencies. Side note, if you're interested in this, just Google UVU GI and take a look at it. Actually Google UVU GI distinction. It is a phenomenal thing that you can add to your degree. But my question to the panelists is, what has the School of Education done to provide students with a GI curriculum? And then if you would, why do you think that's important? Why is that significant?
So let me go with that. I believe Bryan knows way better than me, but because I am serving on the curriculum committee in the School of Education, I remember we approved 2 GI courses for elementary education and 2 courses for secondary, and one course for special education, because the special education is embedded in secondary. So for those who are in special education, by default, they will get a GI distinction upon graduation. That's what I found. Those courses were designed to fulfill the UVU's GI course objectives, as Bryan already explained. What I found, and because I'm also teaching the ESL and the other multicultural for elementary G courses right now, what I did and my colleagues what they have done is that they really went through the GI course objectives and tried to fulfill the requirements to meet the needs. The requirements of GI courses is really fundamentally how to enhance our future teachers, to enhance their global intercultural understanding. And I tweaked some assignments to better fit the GI course objectives, and I found it was very beneficial.
Thank you, Mia. Mike, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's really been a deliberate and a conscious attempt in the School of Education to create this whole environment of inclusion. I realize we throw that term around a lot, but in education, that would mean that even though we teach a multicultural education course, even though we teach ESL course, that doesn't mean that they are content areas. They are actually tools. We teach those courses so we can create an awareness that we can have within our students, that they can, as they prepare their own curriculum, look to the students, their identities, their backgrounds, their lived experiences as resources in the classroom, that they can bring perspectives from different voices that we don't often hear, so that we can view education from more than one vantage. Anytime we can create an educational scenario that comes from more than one perspective, it's a stronger learning environment. It may create discomfort because sometimes those clash or conflict, or there's something we haven't considered, but that discomfort is a powerful learning environment because it makes us critical thinkers inherently to the process, because we have to try to reconcile and create our understanding based on different perspectives. And so within the multicultural, within the ESL, although they're not practitioner courses, they show how you can infuse different perspectives, different voices, and also validate these same things, the different voices, the different criteria for success within all content areas in education.
Thank you for that, Mike. Benton, could you maybe speak a little to this from your administrative perspective of why GIing, going to make that a verb, the curriculum across the board has been important?
Absolutely. I think it's really important from a perspective of the school and administration, both in that we're able to offer this to all students, and that the coursework in our programs are becoming embedded in multicultural education. And as we talked about in the previous section, where we talked about the importance of it for teachers, that when we talk about educating the next generation of teachers, multicultural and culturally relevant pedagogy, I think are key things to be embedded in the program so that every teacher that comes out of UVU has that perspective. And that doesn't mean that every teacher that comes out of our program necessarily has the same perspective, but it broadens their minds and broadens their perspective in terms of, certainly in terms of the way that culture can impact our ways of thinking and our ways of life. But I think also, one of the things that we have an opportunity and have had an opportunity to do and have been lucky to be able to do in the School of Education, Mia and Mike talked about two of the key ones: the coursework that we do, and also encouraging students to bring their own culture into the classrooms and into the discussions that we have in our courses, but also directly offering multicultural both international and domestic multicultural experiences through the School of Education, and the ability for students to actually experience education in a different way by seeing it in a different light. That may mean going down to different parts of Utah and experiencing what it's, education is like, maybe in a more rural setting, or it may mean going to Tonga or going to Switzerland to do part of your student teaching. And so I think from a holistic approach as a school, having more individuals that have that mindset and have those different multicultural experiences makes our classes more diverse, makes the discussions that happen in them more robust, and helps us to really create better teachers because they have that sort of holistic mindset and, an openness about them to other cultures and other experiences and other opinions for that matter.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I am going to ask all of you to expound a little bit more on those international and domestic experiences in just a second. I did want to throw in a couple of things to this as well. We fully understand that not all of our students can or want to go to Tonga for their student teaching. And so it's very important, has been very important for the School of Education to look for ways to create experiences across the board for all students. And one of the things that we have just kind of finalized and are excited about is we are the only school on campus that has created the coursework requirement for the GI distinction that we've been talking about as part of the regular course requirement that students have to take. So there's a number of requirements to get your GI distinction. One is to take a certain number of G courses. Another one is to engage in a practicum or a co-curricular experience where you would either go on a study abroad or a student teaching to Tonga, for example, or you can engage in practicum work locally with diversity. And then you would attend some global spotlights and do some other things, right? So there's a number of different activities and requirements. Well, one of those is that coursework. The School of Education has embedded the GI coursework in the regular required coursework in the program. And we're the only school that has been able to do that so that students just going through our program are halfway towards the distinction. And we feel that that's pretty significant because we do want that to be across the board and throughout the curriculum. So thank you. Okay, so now I'm gonna, with this next question, I'd like for Benton to kind of start off, and then I would like, because of Mia and Mike's experiences, and they're different. Mia has an experience of going to the Navajo Nation, which is a partner of ours. Mike has extensive experience going to Tonga, for example. To speak a little bit more specifically on those experiences and what they have seen from them and the students learning. But the question is, what has the School of Education done to provide international and domestic multicultural experiences for its students?
Great. So I'll talk more sort of broadly about what we do as a school, and then let Mia and Mike talk about some of the specifics. But we offer experiences to students in several forms. All School of Education students will have opportunities to go on short-term 2-week domestic and international multicultural experiences. We've done experiences in the past to Peru, Tonga, Navajo Nation. And then also we offer student teaching experiences abroad. Every student in the school that's going through a pathway that leads to licensure in both secondary and in elementary education, and as well as special education, do a student teaching experience, and half of that student teaching experience may be in one of our international or domestic multicultural partners. We've done student teaching experiences in Switzerland, in Tonga, in Spain, in the Navajo Nation. And so those are opportunities that are available to students. And we offer, we're now developing other short-term experiences, field experiences, which are shorter in-school experiences. We're hoping to do some of those on Navajo Nation and other places. But we also offer, different experiences by bringing that sort of multicultural education to our campus. We're working on bringing speakers and guests to talk about inclusion, global and multicultural education, and so we're bringing that sort of education here as well. And also one thing that we should also mention is in the past, some of those experiences have been partnerships where we've been able to bring some of those students from our international partners to be students here with us and with our students in our courses in the School of Education. And that really, I think, adds a robust and unique perspective to each of those classes. And I know Mike talked about that earlier in terms of talking the diversity of cultures, conversations that happen in our coursework. And so those are some of the experiences that we offer in the School of Education. And we're continuing to develop and work with some of our domestic and international partners to develop more of those to make it more accessible to more students.
Thanks, Benton. Would the two of you like to expand on some of your experiences and specific things that the students have done on those experiences?
I believe Mike has a lot of fun, exciting experiences in Tonga. So let me go first with the Navajo Nation. And so I visited there a few years ago for about, I think, a week. We're there with our students. And one thing I would like to point right now is that there are about, it's fluctuating, but about 70 to 80% of English language learners are US born. So we sometimes imagine that ELLs are coming from other countries, but 70 to 80% of English language learners are US born. Something that we need to remember. Mostly Spanish speaking ELs, but in the Navajo Nation is in the US territory, but they are born here, but their first language is not English, it's Navajo. There is a gap between their home and the school, because when they were born there, they speak in Navajo, but when they attend the school from kindergarten, they prohibited from speaking any Navajo in the school setting. So they must speak everything in English except for the Navajo language and culture class, which is about 2 hours a week. That's it. Other than that, they must speak everything in English. So there is a huge gap between their home and the school. And when we first visited, it was easier than we originally expected because everybody spoke in English. But also we were shocked because they were not allowed to say anything in the Navajo. It was very sad and upsetting in some senses. And we began to realize the state standard, mostly the Arizona State Board of Education regulation. And also we kind of navigated what was going on. And as a teacher, because it's not just about the Navajo Nation student, it's quite a majority of ELs, English language learners in this country, in Utah as well, are born here, but they are not speaking English quite well when they enter the school. So building upon what Bryan said at the very beginning, we really got started to thinking what they really have and what they brought to the school instead of just keeping thinking what's going on here. So sometimes we as educators also fell into the trap like deficit model. So they are socioeconomically, geographically marginalized. They are linguistically sometimes very struggling, culturally not majority. So we are kind of feeling the trap that, oh, they don't have anything, something like that. But we began to think what they bring to the school and what kind of assets or strengths or cultural wealth they bring to the school. And we began to understand and realize how rich their culture is, how rich their language is, and how happy they are, how much they appreciate the school education system. So we learned so much. At the end of the experience, a lot of my students said that, oh, I learned so much from here, because we never expected that rich culture in that specific place, and it enlightened our perspectives as well. And even though it was just a very short, a week experience, but we learned so much. We critically reflected on what we believed in the past and what we know now. So it was a really, really great experience for me as a teacher educator, for my students as a future teachers.
That's so perfect, Mia. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as Mia said, Mike has extensive experience with this. He's taking multiple groups, and so I'm excited to hear his perspective and what he's seen his students learn from these experiences.
To be candid, some of my motive for wanting to set these up was quite selfish. I lived in Tonga for a number of years. I taught school there. I wanted these students to experience this, but not simply for them. 1 in 4 Tongans that lives in the United States lives in Utah. So we have over 10,000 Tongans here, and those students who are in school, and what these experiences do for those students and their families is very validating when they find out that we have one of our teachers coming in who has actually been in Tonga, who has been in the schools, who has been there for either see that these students, our teachers, would invest in them. And so they immediately are tapped into being an ally and an advocate and seen as such. So our first experience in Tonga was a student teaching experience, and we were there for 9 weeks total. We had 13 students in 5 different schools from the secondary and the elementary level. Most of the students had not been in an international, intercultural experience immersed like that before. A couple of them had, but what this does is it kind of contextualizes these relationships. When we have a student in a classroom, all we see is that student as a student within that context. It takes this exposure, these experiences, from this kind of theoretical idea to a lived experience. And it also allows our students to go through what another student would who is coming to our schools from a different background. Because in this way, they were the new kid, they were the new move-in, they were the one from someplace else. And so they saw things from fresh experiences, from fresh eyes. They also learned empathy much better. And also within that learning and growth, even though we may not be able to learn about a culture in its entirety within a couple of months, what we can do is we can more easily and readily see disconnects for what they are. So whether it's the nuances of mannerisms or the significance of content materials, when a student reacts in a way that we may not expect, instead of pronouncing our own expectation on that, what we can do then as teachers is become learners and say, okay, where is this coming from? And it starts a great dialogue, and it also allows a student to become the expert. So when our students go in, yes, it's cultural. Yes, it's linguistic, but it's also very personally enlightening. And they gain these new insights and perspectives. It was really an enjoyable thing to go to Tonga. It's also an enjoyable, and we've taken a couple of groups of student teachers to New Zealand. And there, the dynamics are different. All of the teaching, all of the education system is in English, but they have pronounced separations of two cultures. It's almost a bimodal population, if you will, the strong European presence and also the Maori. So almost two separate groups that are trying to be together. We're much more diverse here, but to see the deliberateness, the intent to create both learning opportunities and validation is what's significant. And yes, we do other things when we're over there. We will not simply be in the schools. We will also see the country, see the, it's not proverbial tourist sites, although there is some of that, but to go into and actually become part of is a huge perspective enhancer, because it takes this from theoretical to application, but it also gives it depth and dimension. I've had students come back, and since Bryan told a story, I'll tell a quick one. I had one of my former students apply to a job in one school district here in Utah, and ultimately she said, "Too many white kids. I want a more diverse classroom." Because not only was she comfortable with diversity, she loved learning from and seeing other voices. And I think that's the strength of this.
Yeah, thank you all. One thing I might add, some of you might be wondering why or how do we choose where we go in the School of Education? And there's been a lot of strategy behind that. As many of you hopefully know, there is a very robust dual immersion program in the state of Utah with specific languages that are focused on. And so what we have done in the School of Education is try to match our international programs with those languages. Not that we are expecting our students to then be able to be dual immersion teachers in those programs necessarily, right? But more that we can kind of just, you know, relate, so our students can begin to relate better. So we've taken students to China. I've taken some students there. We have a site in Peru. The Tonga and the New Zealand is a little bit different. It's not really around the dual immersion, but it is because there is such a culture here in Utah. And so we wanted to have that as one of our main places and one of our sites. And so that's why we have done what we've done. I think that, you know, Mike mentioned something that made me think. One of the biggest takeaways, so I take students to Peru almost every year for the past 6 years or something. And one of the major takeaways that the students say after that trip is that empathy piece that Mike touched on. They say something along the lines of, wow, I know what it's like to be a language learner now. I am going to be different with my language learners in my classroom back in Utah. And so one of the things that we try to do is constantly bring back what they experience in these places to the Utah classroom, because the majority of our teachers are going to teach in Utah. And so we want to make that real so what connection for them. And then, of course, the big question becomes, well, what if students don't go? How do you do this for students who don't have that opportunity? And that's Benton's job, right? That's what he gets paid the big bucks to do, is figure out how do we make these experiences available to all of our students, regardless of whether or not they can. And that's something that we're working on. We have not gotten to where we want to be on that, but that's something very much in the forefront of our minds, and we're wanting to work on. Any last words on this topic from anyone?
Let me go. So let me explain this way. So these programs influenced me to be a better teacher educator. When you think about teacher education program, we always think about how to train our future teachers to better serve our K-12 students. But even before then, we need to think about how to introduce these concepts and ideas to our faculty to better support our future teachers, to better serve our K-12 students. One thing I found very beneficial to me was something like that. I came from South Korea, but it doesn't mean that I'm already international. I have only experienced 2 different countries, but there are so many other cultures that I've never ever experienced before. So by joining this global committee and just experience so many things and heard about and just directly experience those things, I found that I always need to learn something. I dig into learn something about the world that I was not at all aware of or have never recognized before. So I really try my best to adventure other cultures, not for tourism, but for research and teaching, such as a visiting professor at the Education University of Hong Kong last year. And those experiences helped me to enhance my international global understanding as a teacher educator. One thing I found very interesting and great among my colleagues in the School of Education is sometimes they don't know what the international or global educator means. Sometimes they just automatically say, I'm from California, so I'm already multicultural. I know everything, kind of a mode. But for those who said in the past that way, but joined the program and began to realize that, oh my goodness, I need to learn something. And actually, they gained so much knowledge and experience from these international domestic experiences. And I found those experiences help them to embed those ideas to their curriculum, even though it's not multicultural or ESL, they embed those ideas to their curriculum and better teach our future teachers how to be equipped with global intercultural mindset. I think this is the core of this program in some senses.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for adding that. Appreciate
If
that.
I can add something too here, Bryan, I think one basic that is fun to look at is simply the concept of what is normal, because we will often think of ourselves as normal or average or typical, but that is very contextualized. Okay, the Addams family, Morticia Addams, she said, normal is an illusion. What's normal to the spider is chaos to the fly. And yeah, that's kind of a comical sentiment, but it's also pretty significant and really right on. And that's the idea here, is recognizing, looking at those concepts that we often take for granted and bringing them to the fore. By doing so, what that does is allows us to see things by more than one perspective and validate them, but also kind of see things as they are with the enhanced awareness now. That helps us to become agents for change. And we've talked a little bit about culturally relevant pedagogy, but also within the idea of critical multicultural is built that component that we enhance, we enlighten, we give skills and tools, but we also implement that to make a more equitable, positive, and performing environment. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Ananias Nin says, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And so that normal has to be problematized and debriefed, right, with our students. Well, let's move on to the last question, and I was curious as to how you do this in your classes. So specifically, I'm thinking multicultural education classes and ESL methods. How have you, can you give us some examples of how you either do critical multicultural, culturally relevant pedagogy, or even talk about these perspective issues. What are some maybe activities or ways you do this in your teaching?
Should I go first? So
Sure.
I believe and I feel every single reading and assignment is geared toward the critical multilingualism, critical multiculturalism, and culturally relevant pedagogy. So every single thing, I believe. One thing I really focus on now in my ESL method class is really helping my students to better understand about their English language learners in terms of their essays. This is what really Bryan already focused on, and this is what I agree on. So based on Yosa's essays, 6 essays theory, so what she guided us is really about students, what they enjoy. Usually when we think about, we need to know about our students, usually we get started what they like, what they prefer. But through the lens of Yosa's 6 assess dimensions, it's really getting started from our EL's personal assess or personal strength and linguistic assess, as well as their familial, social, navigational, and even resistant. Whatever they disagree with, there is a reason that they are disagreeing on. Then we dig into why our ELs disagree on, and what kind of a personal assets or linguistic assets or familiar or from their family, from their culture, from their community, what kind of navigational skills they need to make a success in the school. So students are creating a visual based on these 6 SS dimensions. We have a lot of fun, but based on those fun activity, they're keeping digging into what our students have, what they will bring to the classroom. And through those activities and another my EL's profile activity, they need to navigate where they are in terms of their English language proficiency level, in terms of their social interaction with others and psychology, what they feel, how they feel in the classroom, and their immigrant status. And I asked the students to figure out where they are, who they are, where they come from. So they just fully understand, try to understand who they are, who their ELs are. And always, before even going further with their students, again and again, I always ask them critically reflect who they are as a future teacher. So they get started with the visuals of who they are, and then create a visual of who their ELs are, and mix match together and compare and contrast, and think about where is the similarities, or what is the similarities and differences, what we should bring to the classroom conversation, what we found in terms of gaps or some things that we need to navigate together. And those experiences help our future teachers to think about, it's not just about different language, it's all about different identity and different perspectives that we need to value together. That's the key that I'm currently working on.
Thank you so much. Mike, do you have anything to add there?
I love what she said as far as different identities, because I think when we don't scrutinize that, we think that our normal is the normal. And so when you talk about what we do in the classes, the first thing we try to do is have the students become aware of themselves, who they are, why they are, where these influences came from. And when you're part of the dominant culture, that culture is so familiar that we're intimately familiar with it, so much so that it's invisible. And yet when you're not of the dominant culture, it's very pronounced. And so the more we can help everyone become aware of what how they look at the world and where they're coming from, and also the recognition that one perspective isn't right and another one is wrong. And you've talked about the concept of different. Different is a neutral term. We often don't leave it there. We will say different is negative or deficit or bad. And I like Bryan's adage that different is good, and that there can be resources within that. But the first thing is gaining that awareness of self, and then looking out at others, and then providing skills and tools to help validate others. Martin Luther King, one of his quotes is the idea that the civil rights movement gave voice to the unheard. And so in these classes, we allow other voices, we encourage other voices. We bring in voices, sentiments, opinions that we may not have heard publicly or as loudly as some of the other voices. That doesn't mean we have an agenda as far as what our students do exactly with those. We don't tell them what they should think. We do guide on what they think about for a while. But what happens then is, as they are exposed to these, they start to recognize where they are and look at why they are that way, and then become more open to evaluating other options. And with that, it kind of expands and gives these paradigm shifts that are now enhanced. And then in ESL methods, in multicultural, it's not a practitioner course, but ESL methods is. And we take that awareness then, and we start to infuse within the other content areas effective strategies that reach all of their students.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Benton, I would like to give you some time if you have any comments on this or anything else. But before I do, I'd like to invite anyone, if you have a question for one of our panelists, if you could go ahead and put that in the chat now. We're kind of wrapping up. We do have 15 more minutes that is allotted to us. But if you have questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat, and I'll let Benton kind of if you have anything to say on that, Benton, or anything else to kind of sum up what we've been talking about.
Sure. I want to add one thing, and that we do to prepare students to be a part of some of our domestic and multicultural or domestic and international multicultural experiences, and that is an intercultural immersion preparation course. And I know that Mike and Bryan have taught this before, and it's really a course, as Mike said, to sort of look inward and sort of address the biases, assumptions, beliefs, our own culture. And any prejudices we may have, and start to break those down, because as it's been said by many, all of us on this panel, it's important to acknowledge your own culture, but to value the differences. And as Mike said, I think sometimes we sort of think of difference as negative. And if we start to think of difference as something to be valued, and instead of something that divides us, and thinking of difference as a divider, but to think of it as something that we should celebrate. And I think that's what this does. And that course, that intercultural immersion preparation course that we do before every trip, I think also helps us to go in with an open mind. I think a lot of times the danger of individuals, especially those of us who maybe haven't had an opportunity to travel abroad as much, is that we go to a place and we have stereotypes about people that live in certain areas, or that are from certain cultures, or that live or act in certain ways, and those we may actively, unconsciously seek to have those stereotypes confirmed. And I think this course helps break down that barrier, and to say, hey, I'm going to go in with an open mindset and understand that just because something's different or just because it's not the way I was taught something doesn't mean that it's bad. It just, and help me to understand why it's done in that way in this particular setting or in this culture, or in this school, or in this country. And so I think that's one of the things that's really helpful about that sort of prep course. It really helps us to look inward and help us to break down those barriers that we don't necessarily put up on purpose, that some of it is unconscious, but to break down those barriers so that we can go in with an open mindset. I want to go back to just briefly to one thing that Mia said earlier when she was talking about her experiences and how that has sort of shaped her teaching. 36% of our faculty members in the School of Education have been on one of these multicultural experiences. And I think that really brings a very robust nature and a very great, a great opportunity for every student that comes into the School of Education will likely have one of those professors who have been on one of these experiences, and they can be able to bring that back to their students and bring that into their own pedagogy as a educator in higher education. And so, I think all of this to say that in the School of Education, we're really striving to find ways to broaden horizons, to broaden our minds, and to take a second to recognize that, that we have our own biases on what our culture and the way that we grew up or the way that we learned in education, but that there are other things out there, and that there are other experiences, and that our students might not come to us in the same way, in the same place that we did, even though they may even come from the same state or the same city, that they come with different experiences. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to celebrate that. And that's what makes great teachers. The ability for us to take a group of students who may have very different experiences and bring them together and show them that difference is something to be celebrated. Because as the world continues to diversify, I think that's more important than ever, that we have an accepting, understanding, and loving culture that really focuses on the positives about our differences, as opposed to allowing them to divide us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was a great way to sum up what we've been talking about. And I do appreciate you bringing up the immersion class. I think that's a very important part of our curriculum and things that we've just kind of implemented in the program. Are there any questions for our panelists? I haven't seen any come in yet, so I don't know if I'm looking in the wrong place or. I will give you 10 more seconds of wait time, and then.
Bryan, while we're waiting, I'd like to add one more. Did something else come in, or am I okay?
No, you're good, please.
Benton touched on this, and I think it's significant enough to address it. We often talk about the idea of vantages or biases, and often think that the idea of having a bias is a negative and that it's malicious. Biases are often simply built on our own exposures and experiences. And we are more comfortable with things that we are more familiar with because we understand it. So we may have a bias. In other words, we may have a preference, but it's not deliberate. It's not malicious. It's simply the way we see things, and often it's unexamined. So I like how Benton said, let's pull those out. Let's look at them. And then we can see where we come from, if they're accurate, and what our perspective is built on. And then that becomes a great opportunity to have a more enhanced perspective that would embrace other ideas. So the intent here is, as we've talked about already, self-awareness, but only when we are willing to examine whether it's power or influence or privilege or simply perspective. Only when we can examine those, do we start to be able to make changes for a more equitable situation, a more positive promoting experience for all of our students? And that's what the intent. Critical pedagogy, effective multicultural education, is simply good teaching, because what that does is foster success for every single student.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. Appreciate that perspective. I don't see any questions coming in, and so maybe we're at the point of wrapping up. Any last words from our panelists? Okay, well, that's fine. I think that those were two very good, wrap ups and ways to kind of summarize what we've been talking about. I do want to point out that this is something that we are quite aware of, that we are not perfect at. We're working at it. It's not something we have achieved. And I don't think that a lot of these things are things that you just achieve and you check box it or whatever. We are constantly doing self-reflection in a school of education, trying to figure out where we're missing the mark, where we need to be more critical, where we need to look at something differently, and willing to change. I hope that that's seen by our students, but that's a very important part of this work and what we're trying to do. I appreciate everybody being with us today. I really want to thank our panelists for joining us and for their expertise. And I also want to thank the Ethics Center for inviting us to do this session. It's an important part of our work. And if anyone has any questions about this work, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Benton Brown or any of the panelists. We'd be happy to talk with you more. And again, just thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you, Bryan. Been good to be part of this.